Andras, hello. I love your shirt. I love your shirt so much.
Thank you. It's got a what is it? Got to walk that fine line between being an ally and virtue signaling. So
Right,
I'm
right.
doing my best.
Virtue signaling is something that I think is it's really tough to know when you're doing it and when you're not doing it. Do you know what I mean? Like I think that for me, being an ally means it is a not just like one time thing or like when it's convenient. It's constant. It's a constant all year round and a lifetime. You have to commit to it for a lifetime. And I'm happy that you're on the right side of it, on the right side of history, you know?
Yeah, you know you're not virtue signaling if it only hurts your reputation and makes you enemies.
Right,
If
exactly.
it helps your career, you're probably virtue signaling.
Yeah, if you're doing it for the photo op or for like, for some bullshit reason, then you're definitely doing it wrong. Like you're absolutely doing it wrong. Really how I've been telling all my friends, because a lot of my white friends are so confused. I mean, I'm white myself, but they're so confused because they're scared. They're like, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. I'm like, well, why don't you do this? Why don't you just like be there for your black friends if you have any? Like, number one, maybe make some black friends. That's like, you could do that. That's a good start, And I was like, try to listen to black podcasts, try to support black businesses, try to just have uncomfortable conversations with other white people. Those are ways that you could help. And I think that burdening black folks with your with white people stuff, like I don't know what to say, like that's the worst thing you could do at this moment. How are you handling this? How are you, I know that you did, which I was going to get to later, but you produced The Sleeping Negro by Skinner Myers. You helped produce that.
I'm one of the he very graciously gave me a producer credit. I helped him find a little bit of funding. Skinner he's just one of those artists who, when you meet him, you're like, oh my God, they're like, I just like being around this person. I met him. He was an acting client for the company I work for. And he's just a gorgeous, talented actor. And then you meet him and he's one of the most brilliant people to talk about film with in the world. And then you look at his work and it is, he's a filmmaker who the whole world should hear. I highly he has a short film. Maybe I'll be able to find a link. Maybe I'll be able to share it. It's called Frank Embry, and it is just one of the most affecting combinations of totally brutal story about a lynching, and it's just absolutely brutal. And he plays the character in it, and it's a true story. And it's also one of the most beautifully filmed things I've ever seen. It's just he's phenomenal. He's amazing. And I'm glad he gave me credit, but my own white guilt, I just feel a little bit bad that he gave me credit because it feels like I don't deserve any credit for that other than maybe just as someone who can recognize an incredibly talented person. But I think that anyone who met him could recognize that.
Yeah. And, I'm reading this great book about givers, people who give, and people who give credit even when others feel like their credit wasn't like deserved. But it shows that having that, what that's going to do for Skinner is it's going to make him more valuable in the long term to you. And you create relationships for life that way. I feel like it's kind of the way you live life and the way I live life. Like just from briefly meeting you, I'm like, okay, well, Andras is definitely a giver. He's a person that gives and wants to give and give generously. And I feel like that's the way to do business. There's this kind of preconceived notion that you have to be an asshole to get ahead and that you have to, do all these kinds of asshole things to run a business, to be a director, to all this stuff. And I think it's a lie. I think it's truly a lie. I think that especially in our business, that being a giver is more valuable than being a taker or what they call in this book a matcher, which is like, well, I did this for you, now you got to do this for me. Like I like doing stuff for people. I like helping people, and I like spreading the word about people, whether I get credit or not. I don't give a fuck. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just happy to do it because it makes me feel good, and when they're winning, I'm winning. So I feel like in a way that's kind of like what Skinner did with you. He was like, you know what, you helped me, and I am going to give you a credit. You know?
Yeah, he did. I mean, he's menschy as fuck.
Well, we're gonna get to your later work, but there's so much to unpack. I have to say too, thank you for being here, because you've been in movies that I know, that I watched when I was a kid, to now, and movies that I never heard of, and I didn't realize how rich your history was with these films. And before I get into everything with you, you know, there's such a value to these films, because I love grindhouse and I love horror, and I put it up there with, you know, the Criterion Collection. Like, I feel like it's just as valuable as art house and other things that I watch, because not only is it a part of my history, but it's a part of film history, and there is an artfulness to these films when you watch them. You know, as dated as they may seem or whatever, there is an element of artfulness to them because of the budget constraints, because of the director's vision, because of so many factors. The cinematography, the kind of like, well, how do we shoot this with zero or no lighting or production? There's an artfulness to it, and I feel like they need to be praised as much as art house and as much as a lot of the other films out there. With that being said, it's an honor to have you here. And it's an honor, and thank you. And thank you for opening up about some of these movies, because I know that this is something that you rarely talk about, or you said in the email, you rarely talk about it publicly. So thank you for giving that space to me to talk about it.
I should just be clear. It's not that I rarely talk about it. It's people rarely ask me about it. I mean, everyone wants to talk about Nightmare on Elm Street, but people rarely ask me about Far From Home, or like this, or Tripwire, or even Sorority Babes and the Slimeball Bowlarama. Although I think that's probably in some ways, I don't know. I grew up, my mom's favorite film when I was growing up was the original Little Shop of Horrors.
Yeah.
And so I feel like when I got Sorority Babes and the Slimeball Bowlarama, which was my first film, it kind of, my career peaked for my mom. After that, everything was a step down. So.
Even working with Drew Barrymore, step down, you know?
yeah, no, she didn't care about that at all. The other thing that you didn't mention about what makes these films interesting, it's what I love about that kind of film, is that you get to see so many interesting actors at the beginning or at the end of their career. I like to say I've worked with some of the greatest talents of my generation at the lowest points in their careers. And Drew Barrymore, Viggo Mortensen, Seth Green, you just go down the list of like people who were slumming it when we met, and now mostly still return my phone calls. So it's nice.
Well, that's good. At least you made a good impression. I mean, I could see why. You're a good dude. So like, I could see why you made a good impression on everyone. Something that I want to start with is your, you know, where how you grew up and where you grew up.
I grew up in Olympia, Washington, where I am right now, where my father was a professor at the Evergreen State College and one of the founding faculty. So I pretty much grew up with Evergreen. But my family's from the East Coast. My father was from New Jersey. My mom was from Massachusetts, Watertown, Massachusetts. And so I spent a lot of my time summers on the East Coast and school years in Olympia, Washington. And then when I was in high school, I moved to the East Coast, went to high school in schools around Boston. And that was kind of where I actually encountered like cultural possibilities. Olympia is kind of a groovy little town now, but when I was growing up, it was pretty, like there were no acting class. There was no theater program in my middle school. There was, very little music. There just wasn't art. There just wasn't artistic possibilities. So when I moved to the East Coast, I started getting into theater, and I started auditioning for, like I had an acting teacher who would tell me about auditions for teen roles. And what did I audition for? I auditioned for Heaven Help Us, a bunch of it seems like a bunch of Kevin Dillon and Patrick Dempsey things when they were kids, and I was auditioning for things they were in. My big break, not a break, was I had had a sort of a featured extra role in a Spencer for Hire episode, which was pretty cool. Kids shooting guns in the woods, and it made them think that there was some criminal activity going on. And then right out of high school, and then I should just say I got lucky. I got an art and financial aid scholarship to an artsy private school on the East Coast called the Cambridge School of Weston, that a lot of pretty interesting and talented people have come out of. And that really created the possibility of being an artist in my life. I think when I started school there, I thought I was going to be an attorney. And by the winter break, I was going to be a writer or an actor or something creative. And I left high school, right out of high school, and moved out to LA and got very lucky and got an agent. Being young and not having parents around in LA and being, reasonably, reflecting light well and being able to speak intelligibly are basically all you need to have a leg up on a lot of the competition if you move out there when you're pretty young. I was 18 right out of high school. So I got a lot of breaks, and I broke a lot of them. And so that gets you to, I guess that's growing up.
Yeah. And what were you like in high school? And did you, or not even before high school, were you interested in film in any way? Were you starting to watch films and get into it and be like, okay, I like this. I like pretending to be someone else, or just pretend in general. I feel like pretend and playtime was big for so much of us, and that imagination and that those making up of stories. And I feel like actors and actresses definitely have a specific way of thinking when they were kids. So what was it like for you?
Well, I was definitely, and I can't remember a time when I wasn't into movies. And my mom and my dad are both, people who I have a lot of good memories of watching old films on TV with both of them. My dad was a guy who wasn't embarrassed to cry during a film. So I always felt like that was a really great gift that he gave me as a man, to be able to have access to my emotions and have an example of someone who is emotionally actualized in a certain way. It's cliche, but I'm old enough. Star Wars was huge for me. I was 9 or 10 the year that it, I was 68. Yeah, I was 9 or 10 the year it came out. And I saw it every weekend that summer. I saw it 16 or 17 times. And to the point where I would be the only one in the theater, and the projectionist knew me. And we actually kind of developed what I think now would be seen as a kind of creepy relationship, but it was totally innocent. He would invite me up to the projection booth, and I would just watch the film in there, but I'd be the only one around unaccompanied.
Yeah.
Guy. But it was all very nice. And the thing I remember the most, and I wish I could get this from film now, because it was one of the great, it was so the thing when I was a kid, is I would watch a movie, especially if it was a movie in the theater, and I would come out of that movie and I would be in that movie for the next several hours. I would talk like the people in the movie. The music from the movie would be going through my head. I would, if I could, I would find ways to go out and reenact stuff. If it was a crazy jump, I would try and set up the jump. If it was some fall and roll on a hill, I would try and, and it wasn't I'm practicing to be this. It really felt like I was in it. In fact, one of the reasons I became an actor, I remember, what was that film? I think it was called The Great Train Robbery. with Donald Sutherland and Sean Connery. And I
Yep.
remember
Yep.
seeing it, and my dad came and picked me up from the mall, and he pulled up and he was just like, man, you got movie star eyes.
I can't really tell people how important Star Wars was for us, for our generation, and what an important film it was. And there's never going to be an experience like that, I think, ever again. You can't recreate what that movie was, what it did, what subsequently, Empire Strikes Back did, and to a certain extent Return of the Jedi. But I think I kind of I see that as the kids' movie of the series. But the original Star Wars was a thing where you wanted to go and reenact it, not only with the action figures, but you wanted to reenact it with your friends. You wanted the lightsabers. You either wanted to be Darth Vader, or you wanted to be Luke, or I always wanted to be Han. Did you want to be Han Solo?
No, I was a nerdy romantic kid, and I wanted to be Luke. I wanted, to be honest, I know it's better. I know Empire Strikes Back is better, the best of them, but I hated it. I hated Empire Strikes Back. I hated it because I grew up, and that's basically been my experience with all the Star Wars films. Is like, when it came out, I was 10, and then I waited years, and I got teased mercilessly for being into Star Wars. It was not cool. It did not help me. Once again, it's not virtue signaling if it gets you in trouble. And then I waited around, and then I got what I felt like was half a movie. It didn't even get an ending, a satisfying ending. And then by the time the third one came out, I was just into other things. And eventually I went back and watched all of them. But nothing. So my point is, when I saw Star Wars, I didn't know that Leia was Luke's sister. So I just saw that swinging across the chasm with her and getting kissed as being the most romantic thing in the world. That's what I wanted to reenact. I remember I had a friend, this girl from down who was a friend of my family, and we went out for this thing in the summer. It was actually the day that Elvis Presley died. And I remember we set up a swing and kept reenacting the swinging across. And every time she'd give me a peck on the cheek, and it was awesome. But then I found out that she was my sister. That's not so good.
A fitting end to a Star Wars story. So you end up in LA, and was that a bit of a culture shock for you, going from where you were to there?
I think anytime, no more so than going to college. You leave home, it's a culture shock. But and move into a big city like that, it was lonely for a while. But then I got into acting class, and I met some people, and you start to build a life. It's it's a lot easier to make friends when you're 18, 19 than moving out there if you're 30.
Were you getting into trouble out there, or were you being good?
I was being good. It's funny. I have when people ask me about the 80s in Hollywood, you hear all about all the cocaine and the weird sexual abuse of kids and young actors, and I was like, no one ever offered me cocaine, and nobody ever tried to abuse me. I feel incredibly insulted. I was never invited to those parties. No, I was. There is a kind of a funny story.
Yeah,
we were such little art nerds. We rented this house on Curson and DeLongpre, which is no longer there. It's now it's an apartment building. But it was kind of, it was a neighborhood in Hollywood, and I guess there had been some sketchy sort of gang activity.
Yeah.
So when we moved in, some of the neighbors put up a sign saying, we won't tolerate any gang activity or drug activity in this place. I was like, okay. And then there was this guy who I guess had known the previous owners, and he looked like Randall Flagg from The Stand. Tall, dark, boots, sort of a dangerous guy, but, kind of charismatic. And he would just come and want to hang out with us. And we didn't know how to get rid of him because we didn't want to make an enemy of him, but we didn't want to attract activity. And like once he came by and he was like, "Hey, you got to hold these bags for me. You got to, and it freaked us all out. So we came up with the strategy. It was like, anytime he comes over, we're going like, we're just going to have our T.S. Eliot reading group. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to do, anytime he comes over, like, hey, do you want to be a part of this reading group? We're just, we're very into this T.S. Eliot. And eventually he was just like, fucking nerds, and left. It was, so yeah, that was probably the most trouble we got in.
That is so funny. That's one of the best stories I've ever heard about getting rid of a shady character, was just start a reading group. Like, that's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. The area that you were in, where was that close to? Was that like, where was it near in LA? That neighborhood?
It was right off the Sunset Strip, near Guitar Center and what used to be called Rock and Roll Denny's. And right there in the thick of it. We could walk to the Sunset Grill and eat burgers that would kill me now.
And I don't want to glaze this over either, is that you are a musician. And at that time period, were you also pursuing music, or were you like a Johnny Depp type where you were like, I'm going to do music and do acting as a way to make money so I can do my music?
I always saw them as being complementary arts. And unfortunately, at that time in Hollywood, it was really like, which one do you want to pursue? And so it actually created some difficulties because I was personally more invested and passionate about the music because when you're a musician, you're a creative artist. And when you're an actor, you're more of an interpretive artist, which I also really loved. It's a joy, but there's no way to, unless you want to become a filmmaker, an independent producer, it's really hard to self-generate acting work. So it ended up being that the two were pitted against each other in ways that which didn't really help either aspect of my career. Now it's pretty standard for people to be hyphenates, but at the time it was tough. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting for anyone who's listening that isn't from that time period, and I don't think anyone realizes that you weren't allowed to be a multi-hyphenate at that point. It was like, you got to pick one thing and do that, and now it's so different. You're expected to be a multi-hyphenate at this point. You have to have a podcast. You have to have an album. You also should be producing your own work. You should be writing your own work. Oh, and you know what? You should be directing your own work too. Back then, it was unheard of, and I think that it's it must be so strange for anyone to hear out there like, oh, well, I couldn't be both of those things. So how are you balancing out the two? Because acting happened first, right? Before that was an interest before you wanted to be into music. Like, where does music come into play?
So, yeah, it's the same kind of thing with the film. Like, I remember as soon as I could figure out how to work the record player in my house, I was listening to my mom's and dad's Beatles records and Simon and Garfunkel records and Stones records. And I discovered an amazing thing about them, which was that it's just how they could completely dissolve time. Like, when you're a kid, waiting for something is terrible. But I realized that if I put on a Beatles record, a half an hour would go by so fast. And so that became my way. And then you just get that into your head. And then I have a lot of memories from when I was young, before I had really learned to play any instruments. I would just walk home from school making up songs in my head. And it feels like a very similar thing to being an actor. Like, you're just improvising with the moment. You're just doing with music instead of dialogue.
I totally agree with you, and I totally agree with you that they are so complementary, because as a director, going from, so I was and am a musician still, but I don't pursue it anymore. I do it more for just my own interests now. But there's a rhythm to directing, to editing, and to dialogue that I feel like when you're a musician, and to acting too, and I feel like when you're a musician, you have a little bit of a leg up on that. You have a little bit of a leg up on pacing and on timing and that kind of thing. So let's get into, films for you. So what after the big break, does what's the one, the Haley Mills one?
Good Morning, Miss Bliss.
Yes. Was that before everything, or did that happen somewhere in between?
I should correct you a little bit. I did get a big break, but nobody ever saw it because I turned it down. So for reasons I really don't want to go into because it's really too painful a story. So I never actualized the big break, but there was a season where I was working a lot. Nightmare on Elm Street, Far From Home, Tripwire, Good Morning, Miss Bliss, sort of all were just like bam, 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 bam. And so, so Good Morning, Miss Bliss was right in there. Actually, it was of all the things that I did, although no offense, if you liked it, that's cool. I think that kind of Disney style of show is just, it'll make you dumb. Not you, but it's like maybe the actors. It's just really bad.
Yeah.
But I got to be there when it was very fresh, and I got to work in TV, which is a way, with the multi-camera series, actually doing basically theater with fucking Haley Mills. And that was those moments of acting with her, and also acting with a very young Dustin Diamond, because he was, again, this is why he was so talented. He was so just perfectly what he was, and his comic instincts were right on. And I have to, in the long run, I feel like the show and that kind of acting kind of broke that talent, sadly. But I'll tell you, in the moment, both getting to work with Haley Mills and this kid were such an amazing experience. And I had one of the best acting experiences of my life on that show, which just goes to show that this is the difference. It can be a show that you don't like. It can be dialogue that you think is dumb. But as an actor, you can come and bring truth to it, especially if you're working with another person who's good. And it doesn't really matter. In fact, your job as an actor is to turn off the part of your head that says, this is a dumb line or this is a stupid thing, and just approach it like you're James Dean in East of Eden. That committed. Going
to Sorority Babe in Slimeball Bowlarama. I saw that movie. We rented it as kids going, great, we're going to see some, I mean, just to be frankly honest, we're going to see some boobs. We're going to see some crazy horror, that kind of stuff. And of course, it ended up being a seminal part of my existence as a kid, going to my friend's house and watching, VHS movies. Talk to me about it. What was it like?
Well, if you thought it was titillating and arousing to watch it, imagine being an 18-year-old kid and being around those fine ladies. It was, I don't know, exciting. Looking back, it was exciting at the time. It was almost painful, but it was a joy. It was weird. I came into it probably more ambitious as an actor than was required. David Dakota, I remember once I was asking him some questions and, just trying to take it really seriously. And I don't remember exactly what he said, but he basically said, this is a piece of shit, right? He didn't say that exactly, but basically he was saying, don't try so hard, which is always good advice to a young actor. But I mean, for me, well, a couple things. First of all, the film wasn't called Sorority Babes in the Slimeball Bowlarama when we were making it. It was called The Imp. And I remember when we were in the looping session to record dialogue after the fact, and they came in and told us that they had changed the name to Sorority Babes in the Slimeball Bowlarama. And I won't say which actress said this, but one of the actresses in it was like, but now no one will take this seriously. Which I thought was pretty hilarious, as if anyone was ever going to take it seriously. But to me, I was unaware of Linnea Quigley. I was really unaware of all those people, but I got to work with the, I don't know, like the Magnificent Seven or the Magnificent Three of that genre, or maybe Magnificent Four, I guess. And to be at the ground floor of David Dakota's career, which is, he came out of the Roger Corman School, and he has totally honored that and blazed a super creative, super gay trail through cinema history. And he's always been very, very complimentary of me. He claims to have discovered me, and he talks about how he took great pride in seeing me in Nightmare on Elm Street, right? Pretty close after that. He's very kind and never follow that up. He's never following that up by saying how disappointed he is by how things went after that. But no, he's a great guy, and I was very lucky. It was just a crazy fun experience. Super low budget. I was the star, one of the star, I guess, kind of the male lead in the film, but I was sharing a room with the craft services guy. It was a blast. I absolutely loved it. And like I said, it made my mom very happy.
So I know that you had mentioned that you didn't really want to go too far into Nightmare on Elm Street 4.
Ask what you want.
And, well, I just remember it. Again, I remember it with such fondness because it was part of the series, and I felt like that was the last one for me in the whole series. Like, after that, I never watched them again. Like, I was like, I didn't need to watch 5 and 6 or whatever, however many one. After 4, I was like, okay, that's it. I'm done. Because I actually loved 4. And here's the thing about 4, what a lot of people don't realize is that movies like It Follows and these kind of like hipster horror movies that are coming out now, they take a lot from that film, especially that hazy, smoky cinematography that was happening in that film, which I love. I actually feel that that's one of the more stylish ones of the whole series, and I love the way it was shot. I love the way it was lit. And I have an affinity for that one. And I know that you had mentioned it's like the most hated, but I loved it and I still love it. And I love it for a lot of the technical reasons, which is like the smoky cinematography, that kind of like hazy 80s cinematography, which I love. I love the lighting, everything. The acting, I think, is really good. I found the story really good. I love that that was taking from what happened in 3, you're bringing it into now. I loved your character. Like, there was so much to love about this film, and I feel like it's one of the more underrated ones rather than the more disliked ones. So personally, I love it. I mean, look, anything you want to talk about with making that film and being in such an iconic series, I'm sure my listeners would love it because everyone here loves film. And of course, what was, Robert Englund like, and just working within that world, like, what was that like for you?
Well, I'm like you. I haven't really followed. It's a method thing. I feel like once my character's dead, he wouldn't see what happened after. So I have not continued to follow after. But I also I'm not a huge horror fan. So when I got the role, I went back and watched all 3 in a row. I hadn't seen the first 3. And actually at the time, it just felt like something on the way to something else. I did not know that it would come to define my life and my career in the ways that it did. One of the things about Nightmare on Elm Street is that Robert Englund, more than anyone else, is, I think, responsible for the growth of the sort of the convention circuit for the horror genre. And I watched that grow. It was him and Jason and Mike Myers, but he's the only one it's actually his face, and he's the one that's there. There's no, so it felt like, I've been a part. He's like my cinematic dad, and all of us who have been in the films, look, we go to conventions with him and we hang out with him, and we are all his brats, as he calls us. And those brats are my cinematic siblings. We see each other every year or so the way family does. And we have gone through the things that family do. We've dated each other. We've gone into business with each other. We've sued each other. We've fought with each other. We've laughed. We've gotten drunk. We've seen each other do embarrassing things. And ultimately, we can't escape each other. We have to keep loving and forgiving and working with each other, because we're going to be drawn together every year or so, or more, sometimes more. And that's a really crazy and beautiful kind of intimacy. I always like to say, I would have so much rather have been in The Outsiders, but I bet The Outsiders don't get to hang out with each other every year. But I get to hang out with my Nightmare kids. I get to be a part of a family like that, which is huge. And I guess it's kind of interesting because since I wasn't drawn to horror. I don't particularly like to be scared, but it's sort of like, it's different, but it's sort of like what you were saying about, we were talking about at the beginning about white people and Black culture, and how, it's really, when you are invited into a world that you are not a part of, and maybe a world that you have prejudices about. Like, I have prejudices about horror, but then you meet so many people who have who've had such a profound, it's had such a profound effect on, and who love it so much, and they share with their families, and it's, as important to them as Star Wars was to me. And it's kind of great to have your prejudices turned on their head and be educated in something. To now, even though I still don't like particularly being scared, I feel like I have such a deep, deep appreciation of horror and what it means to people that I would never have got if I wasn't dragooned into the business that way. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers the questions, but I'm trying to say something I haven't said before about Nightmare on Elm Street.
You have, and it's beautiful. And I love that you are part of the history.
Oh, sorry.
No. Go right ahead. Go ahead. You have the floor. You're the guest.
Oh, I was just going to say one more thing. Sorry. Which is, there is one really potent synchronicity that my father was a dream psychologist, and his classes and the way he led dream seminars was a huge influence on Radio 8 Ball, which we may talk about later on, which is the podcast and the show I've created, in ways that I didn't know. But at the time, he did get to see me in Nightmare on Elm Street. Right afterwards, he started to decline, and things got rough for him afterwards. But I didn't really appreciate the crazy synchronicity that I grew up in this world of dreams, and that, again, the career-defining role that I got was in a film that is specifically related to dreams. Like, that is a synchronicity I should have recognized at the time, and I don't know exactly when it clicked how crazy and beautiful that was.
I love that so much, and I feel like we all kind of, as we look back at our careers, we start to realize, when we're younger, we don't know that things are happening for a reason, that they're happening because of synchronicity. And I think you and I will probably connect deeply on that, is that everything really does happen because there's this path. It's like the Donnie Darko path, like the thing that's coming out of his chest, that's leading him from one scene to another. I feel like that does exist, and because I practice Buddhism, I'm not saying that it's predetermined, but there's a reason, and the reason leads you on your own path. And, when I look at your history in film and what you've done, it's so impressive and it's so amazing, man. It makes me happy to look at this list and go, wow, I know these films. I know them. They're a part of my history. They've touched me in a way. They've inspired me in a way. And just to have worked on all of these is really something to be proud of. which then I want to go now because I have like there's so much on the list, but I want to get to what's going on with you now. So there were two more films that I kind of picked to go through, and that was Far From Home is a big one because I saw that and I love that movie. Okay, like. It's great. You're great. You're fantastic in that film, man. You know, I mean, like you put the work in that movie. Yeah, you really put the work in that movie, and I gotta give you your credit there, man. Like you're excellent in it. So that was a nuts movie because you go out into the desert, you shoot this shit. You know, this was so timeline wise. Did you wrap? Nightmare 4 and then you just went right into this one? Like where did it land on the timeline?
There was a whole weird little controversy that that got me in a little bit Dutch with the Nightmare production because I had to get on a plane and the scheduling got mixed up and I had to leave a looping session to get on a plane to get to the next film. And then I ended up in Gerlach, Nevada, which is where Burning Man has been held, like outside of where Burning Man has been held, basically every year since we filmed. So I got to be one of the last people to hang out on a pristine salt flats during the summer. And it was just, I mean, I didn't, in retrospect, the real exciting thing was that I got to work in this sort of weird kid love triangle with Anthony Rapp and Drew Barrymore, who've gone on to be just have such amazing careers. But at the time, the thing that I was excited about was getting to hang out with Dick fucking Miller from Little Shop of Horrors. You know, like I got to hang out with Dick Miller, got to hang out with Matt Frewer, who was the funniest guy I have ever known. Hey, just honestly, getting to hang out for a week with Dick Miller and Matt Frewer and just joke and laugh constantly was amazing. Yeah, it was an amazing experience, and the cast and that is fantastic, and it's just that's way more in my wheelhouse. It's just kind of a gritty, sexy, low-down thriller with a bunch of amazing people in it. And yeah, I got to play Susan Terrell. I got to work with Susan Terrell and just do some bonkers scenes with her.
When you were preparing for that role, were you like, okay, this is like, you know, you come off of Nightmare 4, you're like, all right, I had to be in a specific place for Nightmare 4, but now with this one, did you feel like you had a lot more room to build that character, to make that sinister kind of feeling to him, that I don't want to say it, but that evil seduction, you know, was that something that you really were able to tap into? And also, did the director help you get to that place, or was he just like, hey, I want you to go for it, I want you to just do this thing?
It was actually the writer, Tommy Lee Wallace, who pulled me aside and said, yeah. So when I was a huge James Dean fan. So when I read that, I thought, oh, this is a chance to do some of that James Dean stuff that I love, you know, the Rebel Without a Cause kind of vibe. And then Tom Lee Wallace on the set, he pulled me aside and he was like, so this character, this is Jim Morrison. Like, oh, that's awesome. So, yeah, it was just, you know, at the time I was so in my art and so committed to, you know, just to embodying different roles, to meeting the character where it was, to not sort of like playing me, but playing the character and finding those things and really trying to elevate everything I did to the highest possible level as an actor, regardless of the material. It's so weird because in retrospect, you realize that the stuff that it's like the John Lennon line, you know, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. Like every one of the films that I was in, I always felt like it was on the way to something else. And now looking back, I realized that thing was the thing. and I'm glad I approached it the way I did as an artist. I sometimes wish I'd approached it differently as a business person, but as you said, better to be a giver, I guess.
Yeah, in the long run, it's much better to be a giver. I truly believe that, and I truly think that, and I think now is a good time that we can now transition to going out, sort of out of acting and into music and into the podcast. Where does everything start to shift for you in your career?
From acting to music to Radio 8 Ball, like it's what I would say is that it's just let me explain what Radio 8 Ball is so that your listeners know. So Radio 8 Ball is a musical divination format that I have been developing since 1998. I was and I won't go into all the details of how, but basically the format is we answer questions by picking songs at random and interpreting them like musical tarot cards. And I've done it as a radio show on the community radio, and then on commercial radio, and then as a live stage show, and now I'm doing it as a podcast. And we've had celebrities. We've had Patricia Arquette and John C. Reilly and Weird Al Yankovic and Robert Englund and many others who have been on the show. Kate Walsh, who was on the Anya Marina episode, huge fan of hers. For me, I found it's the perfect expression of all of the things that I'm passionate about. So music is essential to it, and I wrote the theme song. So, and I sometimes, I get to be musical around it. And there's a whole sort of improv, like you have to meet the moment and use the skills of an actor with it. And I get to be at the center of something, but I get to be at the center of something that is not about me, that is about the person asking the question or about the musician. So I get to be fully engaged and fully creative, but not making it all about, hey, look at me doing cool things, which, eventually you can do that for a little while. Music, I felt like music got to be like that. Like I loved touring, I loved writing music, but I hated constantly having to say, hey, check out my band, check me out. It's really, eventually you get depleted. So Radio 8 Ball, and also something that's depleting is, as a musician, especially as a songwriter, a lot of the venues where you play, people talk through what you're doing or talk through other songwriters who you're there to see. And I've always found that to be one of the most frustrating and annoying things, whether it's happening to me or happening to an artist I'm watching on stage. And I found an amazing thing with this Radio 8 Ball format, which is that when we do it live, nobody ever talks through a song, not because they're being respectful to the musician, but because when you ask a question and then you play a song at random and you're listening selfishly, you're trying to figure it out. And when you're trying to figure out it, when you're listening selfishly, the music actually gets in some really beautiful ways. So I found it's sort of like this hack to make people shut up without telling them to shut up, which, that doesn't necessarily work on stage. Although most songwriters find little tricks to get audience. If you've done it long enough, you find little tricks to get audiences to shut up without actually getting confrontational with them, and you can get very clever with that. But Radio 8 Ball took it to another level where you didn't even have to ask people. You just had to say, ask your question, and the compassion that comes from an audience, and that, like, you really want to figure it out for that person or for yourself. And so, yeah, so that's, I guess that's the shortest description of Radio 8 Ball I can give. Other than to say that, just from promotional purposes, one of the things I'm really trying to do is get the word out about the podcast. It's Radio 8 Ball, all one word, and you can find it wherever you get your podcasts. And we have a Radio 8 Ball app that I'll bring up here and show you. There you go. And,
that's great. Oh, that's so great, dude.
And you can ask it a question and it'll pick a song. It's filled with close to 2,000 songs that have all been recorded on Radio 8 Ball over the years of doing it, and including a bunch of my own. And it's been a labor of love. Certainly has not been a labor of profit. The app is for free, and I'm a big believer, and I think you sounds like you are too, that training the part of our mind that recognizes synchronicity is one of the keys to leading a better life. And this game, that's kind of on from the user level, I think that's the most valuable thing you can get out of it, is just constantly exercising that part of your brain that recognizes it, because when you do, you start to see more and you start to have greater experiences of it. And I think music's a great way, because it's so multi-leveled. It's a great way to approach it, but you can engage synchronicity in as many ways as you can possibly think of, whether it's opening a book at random, or reading the tea leaves, or anything really.
So with that being said, when you look back at everything in your life, because it's such a rich history, man. I mean, people, I know that there would be people that would be envious of what you've done and who you've worked with. Like, you really have done a lot, and it's incredible. Are you ultimately happy?
Yes, I am ultimately happy, but on the way, I'm mostly sad, I guess. If I could go back to my child self and tell him all the cool things that I got to do in my life, he'd be blown away. Ultimately, you know what? Like, I don't know about ultimately happy. We just have to create these moments of appreciation day to day to day to day.
That's beautiful. And I just want to let you know that you have been a part of my history with film, and a big part of it, and a part that I always look back at as something that I am fond of and that I love, and there's a warmth for me there. So you helped shape me ultimately into who I am, from watching your films, from watching films you were in. So, I don't know if that means anything, but thank you for everything that you've done for film, with film, and everything in that sense. It means a lot to me. So you made a difference in my life, and your films made a difference in my life. So thank you. Before we wrap up, I do want to say that there's a great video that you did called Absolutely No Sense of Humor with Andy Dick. And I wanted to talk about that experience. Is that song about Andy Dick, or was it about a comedian that you said, was it a true story? Like, just let's touch on that for a minute.
So, yes, it is a true story, and it is about a comedian in Olympia, Washington. And he did everything that's in the song. And I won't go into all the details, but Olympia is a small town, and he has created a lot of mischief for me. And so when I initially wrote the song, I just sort of wrote it for myself. I didn't think I was going to, it's the kind of thing I didn't think I was going to share. But then when he created some more mischief for me, I just started to use art therapeutically. Like, okay, I need to work on this and put it out, because I need to do something to, I don't know, give myself agency in a situation where I don't feel like I have any. And the song came together in these crazy magical ways. Speaking of Johnny Depp, I got to work with a guy named Bruce Witkin, who was his sort of his bandmate, who moved out from Florida with their band when they were kids, and has played with the Hollywood Vampires, and so he produced that song, and it came together so fast in a way that, like, we recorded that whole song in like 3 hours, just me and a drummer and Bruce, who was the engineer and the bass player, and it came together amazingly quick. And then I was looking to make a video for it, and I talked with this director, Misha Livingstone, who actually Skinner Myers introduced me to. And he was like, well, do you know any celebrities who might want to do this? And I was like, well, I know one. I mean, I played it for Andy Dick, and Andy was convinced it was about him. He was like, oh, this is about me. You should change the song to my name. This, and I'm like, it's already recorded, and the comedian, it just doesn't rhyme to put Andy in there. Sam and Andy are not easily interchangeable. So then the director was like, well, do you know any celebrities? I was like, well, I know Andy Dick, but I don't want to put you through that because that's going to, we just can't, we just can't count on him. You never know what Andy you're going to get. And she's like, well, actually, buddy, let me tell you, I actually know Andy because I was married to an actress who was in a series that he was in. So I got to be around him for several years. And then we got to do this thing, which was actually, it's funny because the song is kind of an angry little fight to pushback. But we ended up making this really beautiful thing where I love Andy. I've known him. He's another one who I helped out when I was a sort of a successful actor, and he needed a place to stay, and I let him stay at my place for a few months. Because again, so talented, so funny, and he's been one of my best friends, and also been terrible to me. And I've been around the Andy wheel so many times, and I guess that's one of the things that builds great friendships is, I guess, forgiving each other for horribleness. But being with this director, we got to really do production, directing, manipulating in like the best way. Like we have just both seen the way that people try and control these on the set, and that never works because if you tell him to do something, he won't do it. If you tell him not to do something, he will do it. And we just built the whole production around how can we put Andy in a situation where he gets to just show up and not have to fight. And it was beautiful. We were found at the end of it, we were just like, I don't think anyone has ever said this sentence before, but this video production was great because Andy Dick was so awesome. Like, no. He was just such a joy, and he was so game, and he let me do, like, looking back on it now, we shot this before COVID, and it came out on March 15th, and it is sweaty, and I'm screaming in his face, and I'm humping his head, and it's just so, that amount of touching. I don't know when we're going to get to do that again. And now it's out there, and I'm glad you're bringing it up. I think the idea of a comedian who doesn't have a sense of humor about being called a clown is one of the funniest things in the world. And I would like nothing better than for other comedians and people to see this, to take some joy in it. And the more views it has, the more it's going to bug the comedian who it's really about. And that will make me happy.
I'm so grateful you were on the show, and thanks for talking. I know you ended your email to me, you said in the end I'd so much rather talk about films I love rather than films I'm in. How about we do an hour on Cutter's Way or Mordecai? Someone with a history like yours, I felt like it needed to be celebrated and it needed to be talked about, and I wanted people to just hear you because I know that there are people out there that are like, oh my God, Andras, I love Andras. I loved him in these movies that I grew up watching or that I saw, and you're a part of film history. And that being said, let's wrap it up here. We've done an hour and 10. Thank you for your time. We can all go back to making bread and breaking bread now. But I want people to know where they can find you on the internet and listen to Radio 8 Ball and all that good stuff.
I just want to say thank you, Dennis, for having me. I had so much fun when you were on Radio 8 Ball. It's something you shouldn't do as an interviewer or as a host, is to think that because you have a good interaction with someone on your show that you're friends. But that's how I felt when I had you on the show. Like when it was over, I just remember feeling like that guy is my friend. I want to be friends with that guy.
Oh man, it was my pleasure. And we are friends. So your feeling was right. We are friends. I want to have you back on the show where we actually talk about films that you love. And again, man, thank you so much for hanging out with me this afternoon. And that's it. We're done. We did it, even with the delay.